Happy Monday, DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Georgia United Credit Union. Really appreciate you being with us and really glad to have you here today. Couple things to make you aware of here off the top. First of all, I know I sent out a tweet a little earlier about something. There we go. That sounds good. Much better, I think. I know I sent out a tweet a little earlier about an issue on YouTube. I believe we have that cleared away. Y'all hit us up and make sure and check it out. Normally, for those of you that watch on YouTube, we were afraid for a moment we might have a little bit of a service interruption, and seems like that's all kind of cleared up and taken care of now. I believe that's all good, so y'all can let us know about that. The one thing that you're not aware of, we try to keep it away from you so you don't have to be bothered by this. The one thing that we've been doing has been going through a major transformation with our studio. DawgNation World Headquarters Studios getting bigger and better, and we're in the process of doing that right now. So I'm actually broadcasting from a new spot today. For the most part, you won't notice anything different on that. The one thing you may notice, instead of me turning this way to speak to my friends on the other side of the glass, I'll be turning this way now. And then over the course of time, we're going to kind of expand out here, and you're going to see a lot more stuff about why this is going to be an even bigger and better version of the DawgNation World Headquarters Studios you've come to know and love. But however, that's all for later on. For now, we got a busy edition of our program coming up. It's John Stinchcomb on the way. We'll talk to him about Georgia's big game on Saturday against Tennessee as the Dogs try to stay hot and get back to the action of playing football after obviously a week off this past Saturday. A lot from the weekend as well in terms of maybe how the viewpoint of Georgia has changed now that we've seen the rest of college football for around 5 weeks here. So that's kind of all on the way. We all sounding good? Is everything good to go? We're all rocking and rolling? Well, in that case, then why don't we get things started here today? Good to have you with us. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It is presented by Georgia United Credit Union, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Georgia United Credit Union. Show your team pride with the Georgia Bulldogs debit card. Check out gucu.org/GoDogs for more details.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is something pretty weird going on, and I'm curious to see if you've noticed this for yourself. Certainly seems like a team that should not have a whole lot of concern for the Georgia Bulldogs is spending a lot of time worrying about UGA. Pretty sure we talked about that last week, and I think it's time for us to talk about that again today just a little bit. If you remember last week, the whole thing was about the light show. Georgia had a chance to create a very impressive home field advantage for the Notre Dame game 2 Saturdays ago, and part of that were the little twinkling lights. I don't know how else to say it. The red LED lights, bringing the lights down, flashing the stadium lights, kind of the next phase of kind of modern stadium development. Georgia was able to put that on display last Saturday, and it was kind of a great experience, and every Georgia fan had a good time with that. These things are rampant around the NFL right now, and it all seemed like that was going to be that, right? However, for Alabama fans, there was this weird response of they also have their lights. They're not sure when they're going to get to use theirs. They play such a weak non-conference schedule. They don't get very many night games this time of year. The typical night game they know they always get to play when they host LSU. That was taken from them this year. That was given to Georgia for the primetime spot, CBS against the Fighting Irish. So there was a little angst from Alabama fans, at least a strong pocket of them. There was a lot of Twitter responses about this that we read for you last week. A little angst from them about, well, Georgia just copied our lights anyway. I mean, how many times did we go through that last week of, Georgia's showing off these lights, but they copied them. Remember, if you'll remember, it got so bad that we showed you the tweet last week from Barrett Sallee from CBS Sports, responding to some people on that. Josh Brooks, who kind of runs the stadium operations for Georgia there at Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium, he kind of came in on this and talked about that just a little bit. There was a lot of that kind of talk going on where the Alabama fans who, let's face it, got to give them credit. They're the reigning SEC champion. They won the national championship 2 years ago. They seem to have plenty of good things going on. They're back to number one in the polls again this week because of how badly Clemson played against North Carolina. It would seem that kind of everything is kind of in good shape when it comes to Alabama, but seemingly they spend a little bit of time worried about the Georgia Bulldogs. An example of that from last week, and also an example of that from this week here too, because there was a video that got passed around Alabama fans on Twitter. That's kind of how I became aware of this. Someone shared it with me, of Reggie Ragland, former Alabama linebacker. And Ragland was in the locker room for his current team, the Kansas City Chiefs, and he was noticing that Mecole Hardman, obviously you know him as the former Georgia receiver and a kick returner, and Hardman got a little box from Georgia, full of gear, right? T-shirts and sweatshirts and hats, whatever else that kind of comes in a box like this. And apparently Alabama's been doing this for a long time. And Ragland is of the strong belief, stronger opinion than an issue like this would seem to warrant, of the strong belief that somehow this is an example of some sort of egregious copycat behavior on the part of the Georgia Bulldogs. Mecole Hardman, you're going to see this in the video for yourself in a moment, at least for those of you who are watching. If you're listening, you'll hear this in a moment. Hardman is like shocked by the whole thing. It's just the whole thing is bizarre to him. But listen to Reggie Ragland, apparently big mad that Georgia sends care packages to its NFL players. This whole thing is just weird. Here's Reggie Ragland.
Georgia want to be like us so bad. And they're right, Mecole, y'all want to be like us so bad with the box. Man, that's crazy. It don't matter. He can't be like that. He got to do something else at Georgia, bro. He can't do it. It don't matter. He got to go teach something else.
So I like the fact that Hardman, if you're a radio podcaster, realize you can't see this. I'll describe it for you. Mecole's on his phone. He's not even trying to be a part of this. Reggie Ragland, who, by the way, only has one tackle all season long, Mecole Hardman's actually become a fairly sizable part of the Kansas City Chiefs offense. So apparently Ragland's got some free time on his hands to be worried about issues like this, is going around saying that, this is Georgia copying Alabama. Alabama apparently been sending these care packages, boxes, to its NFL players for a long time, and this is an example of them copying Georgia on that. Hardman barely even looked up from his phone. He's too busy worried about, what a fast-rising NFL wide receiver is probably worried about. He's not worried about these childish things the way that Ragland seems to be bothered by that. But the reason why I even became aware of this, and you saw it on your screen for those of you watching on video, the Alabama fans like, Reggie Ragland's telling the truth. This has been going on for a long time, and Georgia's been copying Alabama's tactic. Now say this out loud and see how weird this sounds. Copying Alabama's tactic of sharing Georgia-themed gear with the players in the NFL, as if that was some sort of like trademarkable tactic that Alabama's using. Although the story does get more interesting from here. Drew Butler, friend of our program, we've had him here on DawgNation Daily before. Drew Butler tweeted out this week. Butler was obviously a former punter with the Arizona Cardinals, spent some time in the NFL, and he says this idea that the care packages to NFL players began with Nick Saban in Alabama, as if every good idea that's ever happened somehow has to emanate from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Drew Butler kind of threw some water on that. Let me show you this tweet in response to all this. Drew tweets out, shout out to Reggie Ragland for uncovering this tweet from 4 years ago. Alabama actually doesn't own everything in college football. And if you see Drew Butler on Twitter, there's actually a picture of all the stuff that, Georgia sent him when he was, playing, the same kind of care package box. This actually didn't start with Kirby Smart at Georgia. Apparently, according to Drew Butler, it actually extends back to the Mark Richt era doing this kind of thing, because obviously it's not that unique of an idea. It's not that clever to say, let's send some of our gear to our players in the NFL. Every program wants to celebrate its guys in the league. Georgia no different there in that regard. So it's kind of a weird example. The lights from last week, the care packages this week. Boy, Alabama folks certainly seem to be thinking about Georgia a lot. You would think they have enough to do just watching their own team play. But as of right now, that's not necessarily the case. I think that's interesting. Something else that I think is interesting, let me transition and talk about something completely different for a moment. There was obviously kind of a weird weekend where when Georgia doesn't play, most of us like to watch some college football of some stripe, some variety. Hopefully you had a chance to kind of get around and do some other things that you wanted to do, but you're obviously watching some college football. And a lot of people ended up watching what ended up being an ugly blowout between Ohio State and Nebraska. Now, admittedly, there is a real fascination when a player that used to play at Georgia is now playing somewhere else. And there'd probably be some of this with Jacob Eason as well. But we saw Eason for a full year at Georgia, so we kind of already know what he looks like as a quarterback. Justin Fields, by comparison, was here last year. We just didn't really see nearly as much of him. He was limited in how Georgia used him for whatever reason. He was limited here at Georgia. So now we're seeing more extended playing time for him in Columbus than we ever saw at Georgia. And that, in its own right, is just going to be fascinating. What does Fields look with an offense that's built around him, designed around him? A lot of Georgia fans were kind of, at one point in time, curious about how that might work in Athens between the hedges, and now it's happening in Columbus, Ohio. And thus far the results for Fields has been really good, albeit against a pretty weak schedule to start the season for Ohio State. You certainly can't say that Justin Fields hasn't been very good when it comes to the Buckeyes offense, much the same way that Georgia through 4 games has been very good. They're ranked number 3 in all the major polls and are kind of one of the top favorites to win the national championship. Georgia's off to a very good start. Ohio State under Justin Fields is off to a very good start. And for most people, that's probably going to be enough. But there's always going to be somebody trying to stir the pot. There's always going to be someone out there in the world trying to take something and throw it against the wall and hope that it sticks. And the latest example of that is a guy that we also, I believe, cited on last week's show. It's Dan Wolken, columnist for USA Today, who among some Georgia fans has a bit of a reputation for being a UGA hater. You can decide for yourself if that's true or not. It's not my place to say that one way or another, but you don't have to look very far on social media to find UGA fans who feel that way. But Wolken went in pretty hot with a take on Fields on Saturday, and it's worth bringing up on our show for a minute, at least just to make one simple point. Let me show you the tweet from Dan Wolken, radio and podcast. I'll read this to you. He says, "I'm kind of surprised we aren't talking more about the fact that Ohio State has a better quarterback than Georgia, given that Ohio State's quarterback was at Georgia last year." Now, Wolken got the attention that he wanted coming off that, and obviously Georgia fans were plenty mad, and most UGA fans would say justifiably so, for what Wolken said off that. And listen, the idea that you're going to base 4 games or 5 games, whatever it's been for Fields now, against the Miami Ohios of the world, Nebraska who's terrible, and the sort of litany of like tomato cans that Ohio State's played up to this point in time, the fact that you're going to make some sweeping judgment of Fields compared to Fromm, who we've now seen a body of work that dates back more than 2 years, that on its own is ridiculous. However, it's not my point to bring this up just to sort of shout it down for being ridiculous. I'm actually, and believe it or not, I'm going to say that what you see here from Wolken, and Wolken wasn't the only one to do it. He was probably the only one to do it that has a blue check next to his name, but there was plenty of sort of fertile soil for hot takes based on Fields playing well for Ohio State on Saturday. Here's what I'm going to tell you, and you can hear me now, you can believe me later. I actually believe this is a really good thing, Jordan. And it goes back to what I said prior to the Notre Dame game. I told a lot of UGA fans of that day in Athens, I'm nervous about the game, that I'm not more nervous. I'm worried that I'm not more concerned about Notre Dame's chances of beating UGA, just given the fact that all the chatter for the entire week was how much better Georgia was than Notre Dame. There was so much, to borrow the old phrase from Nick Saban, there was so much rat poison in the atmosphere that I was really concerned by all of that. Well, now that's not quite the case anymore, right? All of a sudden, with Fields doing what he's doing and the Georgia offense doing what it did against the Fighting Irish, for the good and for the bad, and you can kind of decide for yourself which end of the continuum you're on that. All of a sudden now you do have some critics of the Georgia program coming up. You do have some foes there to be vanquished. I actually really do believe it's a good thing to have some doubters. I think it's a really good thing to have some national media types to put a little bit of a chip on your shoulder. I think that's a really good thing. And I think it's an opportunity for the Georgia offense to focus itself. I think it's an opportunity for this Georgia team to kind of find some targets out there, some people who don't believe in them, some people who don't think that that Fromm's as good as Fields, for instance. Just exactly what Dan Wolken says. I think this is a ridiculous hot take, but that doesn't mean this can't be used as fuel in the Georgia locker room. Focus this team for the rest of the way. All of a sudden, after 5 weeks of football, 4 games for Georgia, the comparisons have started. How does Georgia compare to the Alabamas and the LSUs of the SEC? How does it compare to the Ohio States and the Oklahomas nationally? That comparison, I think, is a good thing. It allows Georgia to keep its eye on the ball and its focus where it needs to be, getting better each and every week, and making sure that it's the team that puts itself in national championship consideration once the season is done. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video today. We are presented by Georgia United Credit Union, and glad to have you with us, whether it be Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. I said this to our video audience a moment ago. I know there had been some concern that we may be dealing with some troubles on YouTube. That appears to be all fixed up and cleaned away, so we're really happy about that. Also glad to have you with us on the radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you a part of DawgNation Daily today. And as I said, we are brought to you by Georgia United Credit Union, and I want to tell you something really cool about GUCU, a really fun thing they have out there. For those of you who want to make sure you have everything Georgia branded, all the great UGA stuff, This is the next really cool thing to get. You can show your team pride with a Georgia Bulldogs debit card from Georgia United Credit Union. There's 3 different design options to choose from when you open your free Georgia United checking account. There's also options to earn some interest there as well. Now, there's a lot of great things to know about Georgia United Credit Union. There are 19 branch locations throughout the metro Atlanta area. You've got access to more than 100,000 surcharge-free ATMs. There are enhanced security features and convenient access to your money through online banking as well. Georgia United Credit Union is so much more than a bank, and when you connect with them, you're going to find out how true that is. So let me give you the website to go to, especially if you want the Georgia Bulldogs branded debit card. It's gucu.org/GoDogs. That's gucu.org/GoDogs. Hope you'll check that out today. All right. With that said, we got John Stinchcomb coming up in a moment. Let me, though, turn our attention to the game for Georgia this Saturday against the Tennessee Vols. Let's do so by going around the doghouse. It's brought today by our friends at Pella Window and Door. And I wanted to take a moment anyway to set the stage for what I think is going to be a pretty interesting generational divide as you head toward Saturday. If you're a young person, I mean younger than me, I'm 42. If you're, let's say, a decade younger than I am, or maybe even in your 20s right now, it's getting harder and harder for you to view Tennessee the way that people my age and older view them. And the simple reason is that I'm old enough to remember, and I hate to say this out loud, but it's true. I'm old enough to remember when Tennessee was working on a very long winning streak against UGA. And beating Tennessee seemed like the most unimaginable thing for Georgia at one point in time. It's disgusting to even think back on that for those of you who cheer for UGA, but that's the era that wasn't too far removed from where we are right now. And as an example of this for people in their 20s and their 30s who look at Georgia on the road this Saturday, they're 4-touchdown favorite, something along those lines, and see this as a game of very little consequence whatsoever. The one thing you need to understand is for a lot of people who remember, the entire decade of the 90s, really, where Tennessee won every one of those games, some of them close, some of them blowouts, but they essentially won them all. You need to remember and understand just how important a chance to return that favor to Tennessee during this stretch of football, just how important that is for some of the people my age. Let me show you one quote on this. A year or so ago, the Red and Black did a oral history of the Georgia win against Tennessee in 2000, which was the first win against the Vols in a long time, and the only time that I know of that the field was stormed at Sanford Stadium and the goalposts were brought down after the game. It was a very weird scene. I happened to be there that night. But as an idea of what the Tennessee, and this wasn't a very good Vols team, by the way, but they were 2 years removed from a national championship. As an idea of the way that Tennessee was viewed back then, I want to show you one quote from that story. This comes from Jamie Henderson, a former UGA defensive back. Let me show this quote as we go around the doghouse here, presented by Pella Window and Door. This is why the Georgia-Tennessee game is still big for plenty of us, even though Tennessee is not quite very good anymore. Here's what Henderson told the Red and Black. I had a friend that was getting recruited by Tennessee. He wanted to go to Georgia or wanted to visit Georgia. Actually, Tennessee told him. Henderson says, I think it was Coach Fulmer, who Philip Fulmer was the coach at the time. This is what Fulmer told this guy who wanted to visit Georgia, a player. He said, why would you want to go to Georgia? They never beat us. That was Philip Fulmer back then. Georgia gets a chance to create its own measure of retribution during this series of this rivalry that Georgia's dominated as of late, and adding another chapter to that lore on Saturday, even against a Tennessee team that's not very good, for a lot of UGA fans like myself, that's pretty fun. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented by Pella Window and Door. And, of course, you know Pella Window and Door can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. They are a national company, which means you get all the resources that come from that, but they have a locally owned branch right here in Georgia, which means you get unparalleled customer service as well. You also get a great deal. You can get 50% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months. And that offer is valid through November 14th. So you want to take advantage of that right now. Pella also offers the best lifetime warranty as well. There are a couple great ways for you to get in touch with them. You can find them online at pellasoutheast.us. That website, once again, pellasoutheast.us. Or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. Once again, 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They are viewed to be the best. All right, we got a lot more on the dog commitment in today's program. For now, though, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union, hope you enjoy John Stinchcomb right now. And we'll get John coming up in just a moment here. We'll get him squared away as we are looking forward to talking some dogs with him today. We're going to get his thoughts on a number of subjects. Sounds like John's about ready to go, so we'll get ready to do that. And, of course, as I said before, it is great to have all of you with us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Great to have John Stinchcomb here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union. Big game for Georgia on Saturday, as I said before. Even though Tennessee's not very good, it's still a rivalry game for many of us. Dogs and Vols have a lot of history, and for Georgia, they got a whole bunch of years built up they need to get some revenge for, and the 2019 version of that game certainly provides another chance to be able to do that. John, thanks for being with us here on our program today. Hope you're doing well and glad to have you with us.
I'm great, and always good to talk Georgia football with you, B.A.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I guess, John, let me start with this. I told a brief story before you joined us about that 2000 game, the goalpost being torn down, the fans running onto the field. At one point in time, believe it or not, for a lot of our audience right now who are in their 20s, beating Tennessee used to be a big enough deal for Georgia. They wanted to storm the field because of it. What are your memories of that 2000 game in particular? Okay, so we've lost John here. We'll see if we can figure out what's going on that. In fact, while we're waiting to get him back on the phone, let me kind of hop over here and do some questions and comments, and we'll just kind of give you a chance to weigh in. And since our YouTube folks were a little bit afraid of not getting their show today, I'll start with them, and we'll talk to you for a little bit, and we'll get the phone stuff squared away here in just a moment. All About the Waves remind us that Georgia Tech lost to Temple, and he's laughing about that. Waves, I got to tell you, this Tech situation is even worse than I thought it would be. We knew there was going to be a transition with the changeover in personnel, going from an option type team to what they are now. We knew there'd be a changeover on all of that, but man, it's been even worse than I would have imagined. Kind of a rough situation when it comes to Tech on that. We'll get more of your comments coming up in just a moment. John, sorry for the technical difficulties with you, but we're glad to have you with us. Let me pick up on where I was going to ask you. Do you remember that 2000 game? Do you remember because I'm pretty sure you would have played in it. Do you remember the fans storming the field, and do you remember how big of a deal it was back in kind of the earlier stages of your UGA career to see the Dogs get a win over the Vols?
Oh, it was a huge game. Absolutely. I remember the excitement in the stadium, and the fans were so eager that I don't think we were done with the game yet before they were already halfway on the field. So it was definitely a special moment for all of us, and man, that was a big game. Tennessee, during that time, they were some giants in the SEC, and it was a big win for our program.
Yeah, exactly, and really twofold on this. First of all, the spectacle of the moment was kind of weird because when some fans started running out on the field, my memory isn't, sometimes, John, our memories kind of flee us as we get a little older, but y'all were only up 15, and Tennessee had the ball. So, I mean, we're a touchdown and an onside kick converted from this game not exactly being over, but Georgia fans were so hungry for that win against Tennessee. And I guess so, I mean, back then it was kind of a fad to kind of run on the field and do the goalpost thing. Georgia wanted their own turn on that. It was almost like it was a little premature. Do you remember that there were fans on the field before the game was over?
And I try to look back in a glowing way, but I remember being kind of pissed. I mean,
yeah.
It was not a done deal, and as that hour of the game, some fans have already had a beverage or two and decided that they were ready for the game to be over. And I remember it being a little bit testy. I mean, we want to celebrate with you, but let us win it first,
Yeah, no doubt about that. Yeah,
I think hopefully our crowd has a much higher IQ these days because that could have been costly. You talk about a penalty here or there for fan interference, and that might be a very different outcome.
Yeah, I think that's a very true. But as we said before, if you're, I'm a little older than you are, but if you're kind of around our age, I think you do have an understanding of, beating Tennessee just used to be a big deal. And for a lot of Georgia fans this week, they sort of think of this as like an extended, almost like a homecoming road game. Georgia's like a 4-touchdown favorite. It's fast forward to November. Let's get ready for Florida. Let's get ready for Auburn. Let's get ready for games this season that seem to matter a little bit more. But, I mean, I do kind of find myself as, at least compared to some of our audience and elder statesmen, saying, let's don't gloss over this one quite so quick. South Carolina, Kentucky, if you want to look past those, that's fine. But Neyland Stadium, I can remember when this was a house of horror for UGA. I can remember that games up there were by no means a guarantee. You were part of the Hobnail Boot game in 2001. You know how special it is to win on that soil. Let's not gloss over, checkerboard end zones in Neyland Stadium. May seem like a downtrodden opponent, but this, for me, and for a lot of Georgia fans who think of this as a rivalry, is still a game worth celebrating.
I think it's one of the biggest rivalries in the SEC East, and it's amazing they're as down as far. They always seem like one of the teams that perennially is in the discussion, and, for our era, the Vols was always, and talk about a hostile place to play. I mean, you had 100,000 plus, and that stadium was literally shaking. There was it would get so loud you couldn't hear your own self think, much less the quarterback call the play. So it was not an easy place to play, and one of those rivalries that you wouldn't even consider looking past Tennessee. But it's amazing to me, and for Dog fans, we know Coach Pruitt and his background and experience in Athens, a defensive coordinator, and kind of the drama that unfolded there with Coach Rick. And there's more to it that I'm sure has been left unspoken, but I can't say that I'm truly devastated to see that Tennessee is down as a program, but it is weird to think that in the SEC East, Tennessee is not held in the same regard. Quite a steep slope they've fallen down.
Yeah, that's very true. Can you clear up something else for me? And I know that you were in the NFL in kind of the early days of Mark Richt, so maybe you didn't get this. There's been kind of a weird debate among fans lately. And John, I realize this is a ludicrous topic. I do realize. But this is what we talk about on weekends when Georgia doesn't play. Some Alabama folks were mad that apparently Kirby Smart sends care boxes to players who were in the NFL. We showed a video of Reggie Ragland, the former very good Alabama linebacker, a little bit of, not exactly making a huge impact in the NFL right now, but was a very good player for the Crimson Tide. But he was upset that McCole Hardman for the Chiefs got a box with a bunch of Georgia gear in it. He says that tradition started with Alabama, and Georgia shouldn't be copying that. Now, Drew Butler, who did play at UGA after you, says that, no, Mark Richt was sending this stuff to us when I was playing in the NFL. This didn't come to Georgia because of Kirby Smart. It's not necessarily a copycat move by Alabama necessarily. Did you get care packages when you were playing for the New Orleans Saints?
Oh, the ego of the Alabama Crimson Tide. It's not all about you, Alabama. We used to get the packages with the media guide, and a shirt, and a hat, and some sweat. You got some love from the team, and we weren't the only ones. There were some other schools that would send their guys care packages, if you will. So, sorry, Alabama, that's not your show. That's not your only special sauce in how they care for some of their veterans. I think it's a smart move. I mean, you want to see your dynamic playmakers in the NFL rocking your school's gear. So when you look at McCole Hardman, he's decked out in his new Georgia stuff, and then that looks good to a 16 and 17-year-old recruit and anybody else across the country that says, man, Georgia takes care of their own.
Without a doubt. Thank you so much for clearing that up, because your rookie year in the NFL was 2003. You were a rookie in 2003, is that right?
Sir, one more time.
So you were a rookie in the NFL in 2003, right?
2003. Yep.
So we're talking. This is.
Oh, it goes well before he was still in diapers when we were getting care packages. So,
John, I appreciate you clearing that up. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented by Georgia United Credit Union today, and if you're watching us on video, one of the things you see on the desk in front of us, it's the same thing you see when John's with us for our Marlowe's matchup on Thursday. I get so many questions about this each and every time it's on our set here. It's the hover helmet. It's the floating suspended UGA helmet. It's seemingly floating right there in midair, and it really is. This is not an optical illusion. It really is floating in midair. And it's a really cool product brought to you by our friends at Hover Helmet. And Hover Helmets and DawgNation want you to have one of these for yourself. So here's what you can do. You can actually get 20% off right now, but you got to go to the DawgNation homepage. When you get into DawgNation.com, which you go to every day anyway, right there at the top of the page, DawgNation.com, you see the link there for the Hover Helmets. You can get in there. I know some of you have tried to order the hover helmet, and they were sold out of the UGA. The great news is they are accepting offers right now. You can get in on this, and you can get one of these for yourself. Go to DawgNation.com, find the hover helmets link, and then you can use the promo code DawgNation. You can also go to hoverhelmets.com there as well. But right now, the simplest way to do this is on the DawgNation page here today. Use the promo code DawgNation, and you can get 20% off your order while supplies last with our friends at Hover Helmets, and it's really fun to have the hover helmet right here on our desk here today. All right, John, for a moment, let me talk about a slightly more serious subject here while I still have you on the phone. One of the things I also addressed before you got here, admittedly, it's a little bit of a source of curiosity when a guy that Georgia had on its roster last year and didn't play very much, Justin Fields, now gets extended playing time, seemingly for a smart offense coach who has built an offense around his skill set. You can't help but be curious about that. And on Saturday, Fields was playing against Nebraska in a big national TV spot. Georgia fans didn't have their team play at all. So there are going to be a lot of hot topics and a lot of debates come up about what Fields is now, what he was last year. Did Georgia use him properly? In some cases, did Fields leave improperly? There's going to be all kinds of, things that come up from something like this. You are, I think of as a pretty, mild-mannered guy. You're pretty level-headed. You obviously love UGA, but you have, I think, a pretty balanced perspective when it comes to life. As someone who cares about UGA, who wants the football team to be the best that it can be, who sees Fields doing great things at Ohio State, simultaneous Georgia still doing some pretty good stuff of its own right now, what would you tell UGA fans about the Fields experience, and now that he is on one of the teams that could potentially be a foe for the Dogs in the playoff? What is your perspective on all of it?
Well, I think Justin Fields is the player that everyone expected him to be. He just didn't have the opportunity at Georgia like he has in Ohio State. Jake Fromm is a great quarterback and is established, and it's tough to justify taking the ball out of his hands, even if it's a well-heralded five-star quarterback coming in that has talent. Now, the discussion can be, what if he was utilized differently his freshman year? There's so much you can look back in retrospect and say, if you'd only done this, Justin Fields would still be wearing the real red and black and not red and, what is that, pewter? I don't know. So, it's hard. I think he's a great player, and he's making plays for a very talented team against some not-so-talented teams. And, Nebraska isn't the team of old that would scare folks. So he's putting up good numbers, and Georgia fans, I think, probably point to more. You didn't get to see him throw the ball his freshman year at Georgia.
Yeah.
Every time he came in, it was almost another running back and wildcat situation because there wasn't a lot of downfield passing, and that seems to be an area that he's excelling in for Ohio State. And that might cause some frustration for these Georgia fans. But at the end of the day, you got to love our quarterback. I think Jake Fromm he's special, and not just for what he does on the field, but his intangibles. It's not any kind of criticism on Justin. Obviously, he's a very talented guy who's been given an opportunity, and he's taken the most of it. But, we had a spoil of riches last year, and I'm happy to see Justin succeed until we play up against him. And I think there's no debate that we've got a great quarterback in Jake Fromm. So there should be, from my perspective, no ill will for either one of these guys.
Before I let you go, John, I want to talk to you about something real quick that I'm really proud to see you as involved with as you are. And this is something here on DawgNation Daily we're going to be talking about a lot in the kind of weeks and months to come because I think this is a great cause. Touchdownsforchildren's.org. Obviously, we're big believers around here in the work that Children's Healthcare does. Listen, I think a lot of us have had kids that have kind of been taken care of by some of their doctors and physicians and things like that. And obviously, an organization like this has to be funded and supported to continue to doing the things that it does. And I think we can kind of tie this into college football. This turns into a really fun thing as well, and another opportunity for UGA fans to kind of show their pride on this. John, I can't wait to make our audience more acquainted with this coming up in the days ahead, but would you mind just kind of setting the stage for why this is an important thing for you as UGA fans themselves kind of get aware of a great opportunity that's going to be ongoing here for the next little bit.
Well, it's such a blessing for all of us to be connected with the Dog Nation, right? I mean, we're proud of our school, we're proud of our team, and years ago when I was fortunate enough to play in the NFL, my brother and I, we decided we wanted to give back and tap into it. And so we've formed a relationship with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, among others, just because they do such an amazing job and they care for our kids so well. It's one of those situations where you hope you don't never have to use them, but you're so glad that they're there when you do. And over the years, we've been fortunate enough to spend some time with the kids, and the care they receive at Children's Healthcare is second to none. So 3 years ago, they started a program called Touchdown for Kids, or for Children, Touchdown for Children, and it's to benefit, help fund some of their various efforts for children with cancer. And man, what an honorable thing to take up. Like, it's a great mantle, and the way they're doing it is we get to show our school pride. There's no school that has a fan base like ours that taps in. I mean, the way we've supported, what was it, 3 weeks ago, half the stadium's in pink, because our fans care and they're engaged. And this is an opportunity, Touchdown for Children, is a way to show our school pride that benefits kids that need us. And, for 3 years now, you can log on, and Kirby Smart's a big proponent of it. He's got his own team. So I would advise all those out there listening to check it out, get involved, because the kids need us, and we as a Dog Nation do an unbelievable job of supporting those that need our help. And this is a great opportunity to do it.
Let me give the website one more time. It's Touchdown for Children's, that's with an S, touchdownforchildrens.org/team/University-of-Georgia. So it's a lot easier to see if you're watching a video, but touchdownsforchildrens.org/team/University-of-Georgia, and you can get in there. The goal this year is to raise more than $1 million. There's $606,000 raised a year ago, so a big opportunity for UGA fans to get involved, show their team spirit, and raise money for a terrific cause. That's going to be incredible. John, I really appreciate you being with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union. I look forward to seeing you this Thursday for our Marlowe's matchup and what you and I both think is a big game against the Vols. Despite the fact that Georgia's a big favorite, it should be a fun breakdown, and I can't wait to see you there coming up for that.
It's going to be great. Can't wait to see you Thursday.
Sounds good, John. Thanks for your time.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Boy, you talk about coming through in the clutch. Thank you so much to John Stinchcomb. First of all, I think very level-headed analysis when it comes to the Justin Fields situation. It's one of those things where it's a little bit maddening to me, the fact that Fields' name, just in any form or fashion, is such a hot topic. I mean, I am aware that there are other websites that occasionally talk about UGA. We're not the only one that does that. They also have message boards. You can look at our forum. You can look at other message boards. Pretty much any thread that brings up Fields eventually gets locked. It's just kind of the nature of the beast right now. But Ohio State's a legit playoff contender. Fields is their quarterback. Georgia's a legit playoff contender. They could very well be matched up against him at some point in time. Georgia fans are going to probably have to find a way to talk about this subject at some point. I thought John did a good job setting the stage for that. But more interestingly, the fact that John says, I was a rookie in the NFL in 2003. And I was getting care packages back then. The idea that Reggie Ragland, these Alabama folks, think anything that's even a semi-decent idea somehow was invented by Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa, that's an embarrassing level of delusion on the part of Crimson Tide fans, but nonetheless pretty interesting stuff. Let me just do this kind of simple as part of our SEC through right now. Let me just kind of bang through some of the top storylines of the weekend, and let me start with the Auburn Tigers. Now, we could do a whole deal on things where I was right and things where I was wrong. There are a couple things that I've kind of been proven right on, and a lot of things I've been proven really wrong on. I'm sure over the course of the next few weeks we'll hit on them, all of them. But I told you before the season I was very skeptical of Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State, despite the fact that he was getting some preseason top 25 love in some polls. However, even though I don't think Mississippi State's very good, and that was validated by how badly they got beat up by Auburn on Saturday night, y'all, this Auburn situation is turning into a thing. Now, I don't think Auburn's better than Georgia, and I don't think Auburn's better than Alabama. Probably don't even think Auburn's better than LSU. In fact, I don't. But I do think they are getting better offensively at the right time. And Auburn's always dangerous when they can run the football. Last year didn't run it quite as well. This year they're running it much better. I think Bo Nix is getting comfortable, and we always knew that Nix would be a different quarterback at the end of the season than he was at the beginning. Well, you're starting to see some of that maturation take place. I know he threw a big touchdown pass in his first game, but he's getting better over time now. Offensively, they really seem to click a good bit against Mississippi State this past Saturday. Now, it's a big showdown on Saturday. We haven't seen Florida play anyone yet all year. They played Towson, for goodness sakes, on Saturday, although I guess Joe Flacco's brother was the Towson quarterback. But nonetheless, we haven't seen Florida against anybody of merit. Saturday, that changes. It's against Auburn. Auburn, I think, would have had to validate themselves based on the way they've played thus far. One of the real interesting stories in the SEC to this point in the season is how much better Auburn is in comparison to where we thought they'd be at the beginning of the year. Very interesting stuff. Now, on the far other end of the spectrum right now is Texas A&M. Y'all, I made my case for A&M being a dangerous opponent. I made my case that given the right confluence of events, this could have even been a top 10 team. If you'll go back and listen to me during the preseason, there was a lot that I said about A&M that has proven to be wrong. However, I think now, the deeper we get into the year, and if you saw it on Saturday, they played way closer than they were supposed to against Arkansas. Arkansas is legitimately, without question, one of the worst teams in the country. And A&M was in a fight for their life to the very end of the game. That's an embarrassing situation for Jimbo Fisher to find himself in. But what you see here is, and the reason why I'm going to stop short of blaming Fisher for what's happening in A&M right now, A&M is just not a physical football team. They are just not. And Jimbo Fisher has said a lot about wanting to make them be that way. Physical on defense, running the ball on offense. A&M can't run it at all. They can't. They can't run it at all. And what you see here is that Kevin Sumlin, when he was at A&M before Fisher got there, was very Big 12 oriented, right? A lot of throwing the football, a lot of Texas high school football stuff. I've said before that Texas high school football compared to some of the other states, it has a great reputation, but that's not a very physical brand of football they play there oftentimes either. They take the 11 best players, they put them all on offense, and the Big 12 teams and a lot of these programs that are populated with Texas players, you sort of see a version of that in what they bring to the table. And right now, Texas A&M has brought in a kind of a physical style coach, and they are not making that transition very well. So until they find a way to just play a little bit more SEC style smash mouth, what Fisher is supposed to bring to the table, that transition, even though he's recruiting pretty well, that transition is just taking longer than I think he probably thought it was going to take. Second years are normal when we see big jumps take place. But right now, the style that Fisher wants to bring to A&M, it's just not sticking there in College Station. Alabama, they move up to number 1 this weekend on the basis of Clemson almost losing to North Carolina. But boy, did you watch much of that game against Ole Miss this past weekend? Wasn't it a little bit interesting to see Ole Miss pretty effectively running the football? John Rice Plumlee, who, by the way, kind of interesting to see, the one-time UGA committed quarterback, he's pretty good, and he's given a little bit of a spark to Ole Miss, both near the end of the Cal game, a game the Rebels lost, and they got blown out on Saturday in Tuscaloosa. Plumlee's a pretty interesting quarterback prospect right now. Kind of interesting to see him doing what he's doing, running the football. A couple times Ole Miss just lined it up and, gave it to running back, and the offensive line was getting a little bit of movement right there. So we've seen now a couple things from Alabama near the start of the season. We have seen a little bit of imperfect running game from them on the offensive side of the ball. They have not rushed it perfectly all season long. And on Saturday against Ole Miss, and that's a blowout game, maybe you're not quite as focused, and that's always an issue. I'm sure it was hot in Tuscaloosa. It's been hot everywhere in the Deep South now for a little while. Not quite so focused on defense. I got to say, if you're going to start comparing blemishes for the top teams in the country, I know there was some criticism. I participated in this. I'll admit that. A little bit of criticism for Georgia coming off the Notre Dame game in some pockets of maybe not as impressive against the Fighting Irish as they're supposed to be, although Notre Dame did cover against Virginia this past Saturday for what it's worth. There was, a little bit of that. In totality, I think that the resume that Georgia's put together through its first 4 games, I think looks plenty fine compared to Alabama, who's had issues running the football and defensively. LSU, which has got major issues defensively right now. Some of these other teams like Oklahoma and Ohio State haven't played anybody as of yet. We're going to start doing, resume report card comparisons through the first trimester of the season, or what is now 5 full weeks of the season, Georgia having played 4 times. Georgia's not a perfect team by any stretch, but I'll take Georgia's imperfections in comparison to some of the imperfections we've seen from some of the teams around the country right now. We'll make that your SEC through. Let me do one more thing also real quick, too, as part of our SEC through before we completely slam the door on that. South Carolina, Kentucky, I was actually hoping that would end up being a better game than it turned out to be. One of the things I am plenty right about is, this Mark Stoops transformation at Kentucky that was fool's gold the entire time. This is the worst team in the SEC East. Maybe Vanderbilt ends up being worse, but I told you before I was not a believer in Kentucky. And I know they got quarterback injuries and everything else. They even finally put the wide receiver, their very good wide receiver. They put him in at quarterback before the night was over in Columbia on Saturday night. This is not a good Kentucky team right now. They are a mess. South Carolina gets a win it desperately need. Muschamp probably saves a little bit of restlessness among his fans because of that. But Kentucky is awful at the moment. And now for real and for sure, we'll make that your SEC through. And with that in mind, let's do what we do each and every Monday here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union. Let's get ready for a Heisman hierarchy. It's presented by our friends at Kroger. And we start to see a pretty interesting Heisman race starting to take shape right now. And I do truly believe that Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift continue to be a big part of it. And obviously there's an element of wishful thinking on the part of this program and dog fans in general for one of these two guys to be in New York before the end of the season. I won't pretend that we don't sort of begin with the end in mind in terms of what the most favorable outcome would be. However, even though that right now Fromm and Swift don't have the eye-popping stats a guy like, say, Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma does, as long as Georgia keeps on doing what it's doing, humming right along to the tune of being on the shortest of short lists for competing for the national championship, I think Fromm and Swift both have the opportunity to earn that best player on the best team status, which would get you to New York City and give you a chance to win the award. I'm still not quite sure between the two who is the most likely of the Heisman candidates. On the one hand, the media really, really loves Fromm. There was a lot of glowing things said about him, minus the dude from USA Today. A lot of glowing things said about him after the Notre Dame game. DeAndre Swift's going to have the highlights, like the miraculous leap he pulled off against Notre Dame this past Saturday. But between Fromm and Swift, they're both in there. Other than that, obviously it's Joe Burrow from LSU. He's throwing the ball all over the yard. Jalen Hurts, his stats keep getting better. I think that Justin Fields is a real, legit Heisman Trophy contender. And I think the other one you got to mention here is Tua Tagovailoa. It's those guys and the two guys from Georgia. Right now, it's not a Clemson player. Clemson's just not playing good enough on offense right now to have one of their guys in major consideration. Georgia gets better competition, has been putting up better overall production right now. So it's Fromm and Swift ahead of Etienne and Lawrence, at least right now, chasing these quarterbacks who are all putting up monster numbers in many cases with their arms and their legs both. So that's our Heisman hierarchy. It's presented today by Kroger. And by the way, speaking of Fromm and Swift, why is it that they are such a big part of this? Well, Kirby Smart explained going back to the Notre Dame game this past Saturday. Here is Smart on his two-star players.
There were some really large hearts out there tonight. One, DeAndre Swift, who ran the ball with passion, guts, and just relentless effort. The effort and leadership of a Jake Fromm to third down scramble and take two hits and almost get a first and manage the game really beautifully.
Yeah, so listen, those kinds of words from Smart on his star players, those will impact the media and they will impact the Heisman voters. If Georgia falters on the field, then the candidacy for Fromm and Swift are probably over because they're not going to be in the same statistical category some of these other guys are going to be. But as long as Georgia keeps winning and Kirby keeps saying things like that, you better believe these guys are a big part of that conversation. It's all brought to you by Kroger. It's pumpkin flavors back here at Kroger this fall. Now, it's going to get cool weather at some point in time, which we're all really looking forward to and waiting for. Well, you can get yourself in the fall spirit before that by going and checking out your local Kroger. All the pumpkin stuff, whether it be pumpkin-flavored coffee, pumpkin spice coffee, pumpkin pies, even pumpkin-scented candles. They've got all that for you at your local Kroger to get you ready for the fall season. All right, as we wrap up here today, let me do so by saying this, before we do our Gator Hater Updater, by the way. I thought the most interesting development of all on Saturday that got no attention whatsoever, but I believe this may matter before the year is done. If Georgia keeps winning, I believe that Georgia will be the number one seed in the college football playoff when it's all said and done. Now, running the table in the SEC and winning the league championship, depending on which one of these teams emerges in the West, that's by no means a given. But the door is now open to be the number one seed. Clemson has faltered enough to have at least a little bit of a doubter in that regard. I'll remind you one more time when that matters. The Peach Bowl is a playoff game this year. That game is in Atlanta. If you can be in Atlanta, that's where you want to be. You don't want to be in Arizona. Clemson's at least faltered enough for that to be a real consideration for Georgia. How about a Gator Hater Updater? It's been 1,066 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's good news. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union. And on a video, appreciate all of you being with us. And boy, great to have our YouTube audience here after for a while. Think we might not have that. We are just really glad to have you with us here today. So I will remind you about our friends at R.S. Andrews who bring the cool down to you. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. We really trust them to play all the positions for us here around DawgNation. All those anyway. You can trust them the same way. I told you we're in the process of, we're kind of building a brand new studio here. You probably can't tell much difference in that, at least on the camera angle that you're looking at right now. Eventually, you'll see a lot more of the bells and whistles that we're putting in place here. But as we're building the studio, it does remind me of whether you're doing a kind of a new build to your house, add-on, you're doing new construction from scratch. You see a lot of the things behind the walls now that you don't see once the drywall's put up and everything else. There's pipes, there's air vents, there's all that kind of stuff that you don't see. Well, that's what our friends at R.S. Andrews spend all their time thinking about. The stuff that goes on, those major systems behind the walls in your house, they do that for a living, and they do it really well. They'll show up on time, do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That's why DawgNation recommends R.S. Andrews, and I hope you'll check them out there as well. With that said, we got a little bit of a pocket of time here. We've got a little bit to do with our radio and podcast today, so I'll hop off in a minute. But for now, let me just take a few of your comments. I'll go to Facebook now. I was on YouTube briefly a little earlier during our show while we were waiting on our guest, and we'll see what's happening on the Facebook side of things here. And say good to have you with us as a part of our program today. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on kind of where things stand at the moment. Hank Watson says, "Have you gone politically correct?" Did I not say those lousy stinking Gators? Hank, no. The last thing I want to be accused of is being politically correct. Thank you, sir. No, they are lousy, stinking Gators. No doubt about that. I apologize. Sometimes I hope you're sitting down for this. I have a tendency to be a little long-winded sometimes, and I can hear the music running out, and I know I gotta wrap it up and move on. And so if I ever go short on that, it's because I've spent too much time talking about something else. Casey Cochran says, blackout Missouri, not to motivate the team, but the crowd. Auburn has a bye. Yeah, people want to see the black jerseys being worn, and as a non-motivational factor, I think that's plenty fine. I don't mean to be tedious about this, but I do think it's a fair question to ask. Is there a problem wearing black jerseys against a team that also has black as one of its predominant colors? Now, like I said, I realize that's a tedious question to ask, but Missouri almost for certain will wear black pants to Athens. Do you worry about your team wearing black jerseys, the other team's wearing black pants? You'll probably say no, which is fine, because, two teams which have black as a predominant part of their color scheme, I'm sure they play each other all the time. But that thought does come to mind there a little bit. Wyatt Filden says, what is your prediction for Georgia versus Tennessee? I'm assuming that it's going to be a big blowout. I think Tennessee's terrible. They're actually worse than I thought they were. I thought that Tennessee would be a little bit better offensive. I thought that Chaney would make a better impact than he's made. I thought that Garantano would be a little bit better than he's turned out to be. I guess I didn't realize the Tennessee offensive line was going to be quite so bad. So I've had to recalibrate my initial feelings on Tennessee. At one point in time, I told y'all that I thought this was a real legitimate secondary there as well. Now, I'm honestly not quite sure how that group's played. I know that Bryce Thompson, for the most part, has not been playing. So I'm recalibrating on that. And based on my recalibration of Tennessee, I don't really see any way they keep this close unless somehow Georgia's not motivated coming off a bye. Tennessee's had itself a bye to get ready for this game. You might typically say, well, that gives Jim Chaney a chance to know how to attack the Kirby Smart defense, but I don't think the extra week really helps in that regard. For the most part, I think these coaches or players knowing their old systems, I think a lot of that's overrated because, Georgia hires so many analysts that, they have every tendency for every team down pat, even if it's a team they don't see very much. I guarantee there's not a play that Notre Dame could have run this past Saturday, I guess, except for throwing to the tight end, which Georgia didn't seem to have covered. But other than that, every other scheme imaginable, these analysts have already figured out anyway. Matt Rukavina brings up a good point. And I was tempted to want to say this, but I don't want. Let me read Matt's comment, then I'll give you my thought on this. He says, we won 41-0 with a freshman quarterback 2 years ago, and they were probably better back then. Yeah, I think Tennessee's worse now than it was in 2017. There was a part of me that wondered, is it just too greedy to ask for 2 consecutive blowouts? Not blowouts, 2 consecutive shutouts. I'm talking about in Knoxville. Shut them out in 2017, Is it too greedy to ask for that again in 2019? Now, one of the reasons why I'm hesitant to want to say that is because I feel like I shot my mouth off a little too much prior to the Notre Dame game, just to be completely honest with you. I thought I was a little too probably writing some checks that ultimately Georgia didn't cash. So I'm trying to be a little more humble, a little more, whatever the synonym for humble is. But there is a part of me that wonders, could Georgia go out here and pitch a shutout for consecutive seasons in Knoxville? I know Georgia got a shutout there in 81, right? Like 42-0 81. And I believe that was the last shutout for Georgia in Knoxville prior to the 2017 game. I'm guessing there aren't a lot of teams that have shut out the Vols in Neyland in consecutive trips very much. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about. By the way, we actually may talk about this on the show tomorrow. Georgia's scoring defense right now is really good, especially given who Georgia has played. The scoring defense right now is pretty good. Now, that's also a pretty misleading stat. But my point is, and we may do this on the show tomorrow, my point is, given who Georgia's played, I'm not quite so sure that is such a misleading stat for Georgia. I'll explain more about that later on. Nick Lurch likes the idea of the back-to-back shutouts. What else? Philip Jordan Wells says, we lease land to the state of Tennessee after the dominance against Vanderbilt and what could happen against Tennessee on Saturday. That's pretty funny, Philip. Jennifer Caldwell-Sperlin says the defense is doing really good. Yeah, I mean, right now the numbers look pretty good for that. James Bryant says 2 consecutive shutouts. Spurrier would have printed it on T-shirts and handed them out for free. That's not greedy at all. I like that comment. It's pretty funny. Carl Burrow says, who pulls out the win this weekend, Auburn or Florida? So I've been saying this since before the season started, that once you got into this stretch of games for Florida, these SEC West games, Auburn, LSU, obviously Georgia, this is where the real Florida is going to show up. I don't believe that Florida can stay with Auburn. Now, I've also been wrong a lot this season, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. You're certainly free and fair to do that. But this is where I've kind of always felt like the real trouble for Florida was going to begin. Now, however, y'all should appreciate the fact that I try to be as honest with all of you as I can. Not only do I analytically think that's going to happen, I emotionally want that to happen. And the emotional fan side of me that wants this to happen is a little bit concerned about one thing. Boy, there's going to be a lot of Auburn love this week. A lot of folks are going to be saying, oh my gosh, who knew Auburn's going to be this good? They're always good when you expect them not to be. And, there's going to be a lot of rat poison for Auburn here this week. I think you got to be really, really careful about that. I still think Auburn wins the game, but admittedly, with someone who's got a little bit of an emotional chip on the table in terms of seeing Florida drop a game here, because I dislike Florida more than I dislike Auburn by a little bit anyway, at least. Given that as the status, I sure would like for Auburn not to be quite getting as many pats in the back as it's going to get this week, because they are going to get a lot of them. Danny Blackman says Auburn's going to blow Florida out of the swamp. Yeah, I believe that Auburn is pretty clearly the better team, Danny. I think you're right about that. I also believe, and this is something I've been kind of saying for a while, and maybe I'll be proven right on this, maybe I won't, but with all the love that Dan Mullen has gotten at Florida because he's a new coach, I have never been of the belief that Florida was measurably a better program than Auburn. Because we think of Auburn as a program in descent because they wanted to push Malzahn out the door. We think of Florida as a program on the ascent, and I believe a lot of that just because there's a natural honeymoon that goes from a new coach. Compare recruiting rankings, compare, big wins, results in the field. Auburn plays a more difficult schedule typically, but how much of what we think of is that makes Florida as a program, not by we, I mean just the collective public, because a lot of our audience doesn't feel this way, but how much of what we think about Florida compared to Auburn is based on an easier schedule and a newish coach, as opposed to Auburn, typically a tougher schedule, coach that some Auburn fans have gotten tired of. But if I gave you a homework assignment and said, I want you to write me a 500-word essay on why Florida is a better program than Auburn, I think you'd be struggling to find any evidence to support that. And that's not what the common opinion seems to be. All About the Wave says LSU's dealing with injuries. Maybe so, but that doesn't seem to completely explain all their issues on defense. They're not as good defensively as I thought they would be. 48 and Still Lifting says, to the host of the show, thank you, brah. Love the show, and I was raised 25 miles from UGA, so I am UGA. Thank you for your contributions. 48, I really appreciate that. It's a very nice thing for you to say. Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. Brian McPhail says Gus is the best thing for UGA. Keep him in Auburn. It's kind of funny. We are always kind of teetering on the brink with that program, right, of them finally just last straw. They're sick and they're fed up with Auburn. I'm sorry, sick and fed up with Malzahn, and then he finds a way to kind of, I don't know, stay in the good graces. I mean, Auburn fans today have to be pretty happy, right? Now, they got tough games coming up. Some of the analytical rankings don't exactly favor Auburn in a lot of these games that they have coming up, but I mean, still, you got to think they're at least pretty happy with Malzahn at the moment. And it's also kind of funny to think too that as Auburn fans are maybe a little happier with Malzahn, we're also in a situation where almost for sure the Arkansas job is going to be open again at some point. Chad Morris is not the solution there in Fayetteville. I'm not quite sure who is, but it's not going to be Morris. So it's kind of funny. The thing that got Malzahn the big contract extension not too long ago, that's about to be in place again. I mean, the Arkansas job is going to be open. That's Malzahn's home state. I wonder. And Arkansas has got no shortage of money. Remember, the reason why they play this game in Jerry World every year against Texas A&M is because Jerry Jones is an alumnus and a big booster of Arkansas, to say nothing of the Walmart people. The Glass family that owned the Kansas City Royals, or maybe still does. They are also connected to Walmart, but they're Arkansas boosters. Arkansas's probably got as many rich boosters as any program in the SEC does. If they ever decide to really flex their muscles, they could do something from a coaching standpoint. So that'll be interesting to watch. Caleb Herto says LSU and Alabama are one-dimensional teams, easy to stop. So I agree with you on the first part of this, Caleb, but disagree with you on the second part. They are pretty one-dimensional right now. LSU has not run the ball very well. Somebody actually, it was our buddy Dimitri Sullivan, who y'all see on YouTube. He sent this to me on Twitter the other day. Have y'all seen John Emery Jr.'s numbers to this point in time? They are not particularly strong as of right now. It's really kind of interesting to see. He's not running the ball nearly as well as I thought he would have. So for now, LSU is a little bit of a one-dimensional team. Alabama also not really committing to the run the way that I thought they would be. They are also at least a little bit of a one-dimensional team in the most starkest, blunt definition of those terms. But the one part, Caleb, where I'm going to disagree with you on, though, is I don't know that necessarily makes them all that much easier to stop. LSU's got a good quarterback and a good crop of wide receivers, even with Terrace Marshall being injured. Alabama, Devontae Smith was the latest, and I know Georgia fans have bad memories of Devontae, but didn't he have 4 touchdowns on Saturday? They've got 4 receivers who, the best I can tell, Judy gets the most love. I'm not even sure Judy's the most difficult to defend. And maybe Waddle of the speedster. So as one-dimensional as Alabama is, I don't think it necessarily makes them all that much easier to stop, because you've got to devote so many resources to closing down those passing lanes. It becomes a little bit difficult to rush the passer, and it becomes really, really risky to say you're going to try to stop the run with only a small number of defenders in the box. So I get what you're saying, Caleb. They are one-dimensional, but that doesn't necessarily make me feel all that much better about getting a chance to stop them. Lou Dog says, if we don't get Noah Sewell, I'll be disappointed. We need some he says he'll be disappointed if they don't get Noah Sewell. I think that Jeff's got a piece coming on Sewell today at DawgNation.com, so you may get a chance to see that for yourself. You may get a chance to see that. So, and I played the audio for you last week of what Jeff said about Sewell on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger this past week. Jeff seems to think that's a pretty good situation right now, so keep that in mind. Randall Scott Peterson says, BA, how worried should UGA fans be about the offensive formation and play calls not matching and Fromm having to make those corrections? And that's a good question. Randall, I will always tell you that until Georgia just goes on a string of wins, I'm always going to have a little bit of a bad memory in my mind of the LSU game in 2018. That for me that's about the low water mark for Georgia in this kind of era of 2017, 2018. In a lot of ways, the 18 LSU game was even worse than the 17 Auburn game, because at least it was somewhat easy to explain why Auburn was having the success in 2017 than it was. Georgia really seemed to get out schemed in that 2018 LSU game. So I always have that in the back of my mind. I think this past Saturday, though, I think Georgia thought it had a game plan that would work in the first half. They wanted to get playmakers in space, and that required short, safe, easy throws. I think it thought it was a big favorite in a game, and only mistakes could get it beat. So therefore, make an easy throw to a playmaker, that guy's going to make a man miss in space, and you're going to matriculate the ball down the field that way. Notre Dame, to its credit, my dad said this, and that's a pretty good point. Notre Dame, to its credit, tackled really well. And when it was, bringing down those receivers to the line of scrimmage, or, James Cook on a jet sweep, or, it just tackled well. And that forced Georgia to have to make an adjustment, and then Georgia did. Now, you could have said, well, Georgia should have been more aggressive from the get-go. And you're probably right about that, right? But Georgia had a game plan, based it on, what it thought about its opponent. And then when that game plan didn't work, it made the adjustment. Kirby then spent the following week saying all the right things. I go back and listen to some of the audio we played last week on our program of Kirby in the Notre Dame, after the Notre Dame game, saying, we got to get the ball to playmakers, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to, tack vertically, whatever it was that he said. We got to do all that. It's far easier to say that and do that. That's one of the reasons why I'm interested in Tennessee on Saturday, despite the fact, in addition to the fact, that it's a rivalry game for those of us who can remember when Tennessee was really good. It's also a chance for Georgia against, there's still some bodies in that secondary. There's probably some guys in that secondary that play in the NFL. Go out there and attack this team. Don't have a crazy, reckless game plan because, you're 4-touchdown favorite. But if you really want to be a more aggressive team, if you want to concentrate on getting balls to playmakers, then the Tennessee game provides a chance to do that. So you say, should we be concerned about this? Kirby seemingly said the right stuff this past week, because I did have a little bit of a problem with some of what I saw against the Fighting Irish. I made my case on the show. Not everybody agreed with that. Not everybody has to. But for me, I would like to have seen some things different than what I saw. Let's see what happens now in the next couple of weeks against overmatched opponents. It's a great chance to go out there and get fat as an offense. And then if that doesn't happen then, by a week before Florida, at that point in time, maybe concern is the right emotion to have. For now, though, I think it's more curious than concern. You understand the difference? I am curious to see what Georgia does offensively the next 3 weeks against Power 5 competition. The Vanderbilt game was kind of a mixed bag of results. Power 5 opponent. Georgia had some good, some not quite so good. Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky provide you a chance to make a comparison and see the growth that's taken place. We're going to do like 1 or 2 more minutes, then I've got to get off the air. Devin Glenn says the Bama defense is weak and will be their weakness all year. Yeah, Devin, right now, this is not a typical Bama defense. It's not. And last year, they got Christian Miller back from injury and some things like that, so they had some opportunities to get guys back. I don't know that, the one linebacker, Dylan Moses, I'm assuming, is out for the entirety of the year. I don't know, and, other guys transfer portal. So I don't really know what they hope to get back to make things necessarily better. But as of right now, this is not a typical Alabama defense. Still an elite team by almost any estimation, but not a typical Alabama defense necessarily. Marcinio Askew says, B.A., do you think Kirby and staff are being too conservative with Fromm? I do, Marcinio, I do. I feel like Kirby's stopping Fromm from being great. Yeah, Marcinio, I think that in just the simplest of terms, I do believe that the Georgia offense in the first half last Saturday was too conservative. And I think it's been too conservative in a lot of instances before. And as I said a minute ago, there may have been a justifiable reason to have a somewhat careful game plan, but the only reason why Notre Dame had a chance to win that game late, I believe, is because of the carefulness with which Georgia approached the game. I think that, I think when you have the greater talent, and Georgia's going to have the better talent against anybody it could play, with the exception of like 2 or 3 teams, and at that point in time, we're talking like equal talent. Georgia doesn't have a talent mismatch, at least to any kind of measurable magnitude, against really anybody. When you have the talent advantage, it puts responsibility on the coaching staff to utilize that advantage. In almost every instance, more talent means being more aggressive. You want to force the act. You want to push the issue. If you and I are playing poker with each other, and you've got a stack of chips, and I'm short stacked over here, you're bullying me, right? You're going all in. You're using your stack to your advantage. I think the talent in college football is the same way. If I've got big stacks of talent and you're short stacked over there, then I want to throw it around, right? I'm going to try to run you off the table. And I do think that that's the responsibility the Georgia coaching staff have, is that aggressive coaching tactics are typically a pretty good ploy, just because oftentimes the other coach won't match you. But it's almost a required ploy when you've got the better overall talent. I think the talent that Kirby's amassed at Georgia puts the responsibility on him and his coaches to use it aggressively. So, Marcinio, I'm really glad you asked that. James Bryant says, if you never open your playbook, you'll never learn your playbook. Conservatism is for politics. Don't play scared. And, for the most part, I guess I kind of agree with that. James Crump says Fromm is limited. So here's what I truly believe about Fromm. I believe that you can compare him to a lot of other quarterbacks and say he doesn't quite have the perfect match of skills the way that some guys do. He obviously doesn't run like Fields does. He doesn't run like Hurts does. He probably doesn't have the arm strength of Tungo Vailoa. You can look at a lot of the various quarterback skill sets and say the Fromm thing is not quite what it matches up to be. But here is why I think that Fromm is an elite quarterback, and here's why in a head-to-head matchup, and all those teams, for the most part, with the exception of Oklahoma, have similar talent around the quarterback. Oklahoma has a little less, but they have a system that's designed to really exploit the talent they do have. So we're talking about a fairly even game between all those teams: Oklahoma, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, Alabama. I won't quite put an LSU in there yet, but I believe there will be in there by the end of the season. So that group of teams right there. The reason why I believe that Fromm can go head-to-head and can win with any of those quarterbacks, not a guarantee that he will win, but can win against any of those quarterbacks, is Fromm has in abundance the skill that matters more than anything else. I want an accurate passer more than I want anything else. To this day, Fromm is still a better quarterback than Jacob Eason is. With all due respect to Eason, who I liked, to this day, Fromm has been, was, and is a better quarterback than Eason because he's just more accurate than Eason. Eason can throw it through a brick wall, but Fromm can throw it, between a spot this big. And that accuracy matters more than anything else. Fromm knows how to run the offense, and he's an accurate thrower. That gives him a chance to beat guys, and frankly, beat them handily, who are better athletes than him, more able runners, stronger arm. Fromm's accuracy gives him that chance. And I know some of you don't believe that, and you don't have to. But I am fine with the quarterback that Georgia has against any of those other quarterbacks because of what I know Fromm does well. He's got the guts to throw it into a tight spot, and he's got the accuracy to succeed when doing so. It's one of the reasons why I think NFL teams are going to like him, because accuracy really matters, especially the more you get into even competition. The throwing lanes just get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. You've got to be able to throw it in there. Fromm can do that. So the things in which Fromm is limited in comparison to some of the other quarterbacks, I don't think it matters quite as much. But not everyone's going to agree with that. James Crump also says that Fromm has the best team around him. That's the reason why Fields or Hurts will not beat us this season. I do think you got to feel pretty good about what Georgia does have around it right now. And through 5 weeks of the season, I believe overall, you probably should feel a little better maybe than you even did at the start of the season. Maybe, although I guess maybe that's up for debate a little bit. Hank Watson says, also don't forget about Fromm's pre-snap reads as well. He adjusts out of bad situations. That's probably true as well. A lot of comments coming in. I wish we had time to take all these. Y'all, I've got to get ready to go. Let me pop back over to YouTube for 1 second. Then after that, and we'll try to do tomorrow. Sometimes on Tuesdays we do extended comments. We'll try to do an extended comment today. Sav Atlanta. I'm going to make this the last one because this is a pretty good comment. He says, did BA just say Oklahoma has a system that exploits its players' talents? I wish UGA starts exploiting its offensive talents the same way. But Sav, now you know this. It's a little easier in that conference to do it. And I don't want to turn this into an SEC versus Big 12 thing, and some Big 12 defense are getting a little bit better. For instance, Baylor's not a bad defense anymore. It's not great, but it's not bad. Iowa State's probably getting a little bit better of a defense. Texas got some talent on that side of the ball. So we're getting some more defenses in the Big 12. But in that league where everybody's playing 100 snaps a game, it's just a little bit easier to exploit that kind of stuff. And Lincoln Riley truly is a good offensive coach. But I'm going to tell you right now, for the totality of the program, I wouldn't trade Smart for Riley. Now, if I'm an NFL team like the NFL team that plays down the road from where I am right now, the Atlanta Falcons, I'll trade Dan Quinn for Lincoln Riley in a heartbeat. I'm not trading Smart for Riley, though, because ultimately there are multiple phases in the game. And you saw the Oklahoma offense against Georgia. For as much as it was exploiting things earlier, over time, big, strong teams have a tendency to wear you down, and that's pretty much what happened in the Rose Bowl a couple of years ago. Caleb Herto says, still thinks the Dogs can do it in a big spot against Alabama. Had him on the rope every time. And Caleb, for the most part, I kind of agree with you. Cliff Payne says, if UGA had thrown it more, turnovers could have cost them the game. Notre Dame thrives on turnovers. Kirby played it smart. He at least played it smart, or what he thought was smart, until it wasn't working. So the smartest thing of all, and this is probably the point we can all agree on, whether the initial game plan was smart or not, by halftime it wasn't working, and the adjustment is probably what saved Georgia there that day. And that, I think we can probably all agree with. And if we're all in agreement, it's probably a pretty good place to shut things down for today. As I said before, we'll take a lot more of your comments coming up tomorrow. We'll try to do a little bit longer version of all of that tomorrow. For now, though, let me remind you that you can get your Atlanta news now at AJC.com. Mentioned this before. There's going to be a good bit of chatter coming off the Falcons. 1-3 start. We'll do some of this on Falcons News Now, sponsored by Miller Lite later on this afternoon on the AJC Falcons News Now Facebook page. But just if you live in the Atlanta area and you got friends who are Falcons fans, you know you're already hearing this. What is the future of this organization after an ugly loss to a pretty mediocre Titans team yesterday? Good stuff from Steve Hummer, D. Orlando Ledbetter, the rest of the AJC staff there on that, AJC.com. Also, there's going to be a bunch of Braves stuff this week. Braves start the playoffs later on this week, so if you're like me and a Braves fan, the way to stay in touch and to check in throughout the day, AJC.com to get your Atlanta news now. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible as well. You know, it's still hot for right now, which means, it was hot yesterday too, which means you want to get that $99 Smiley tune-up to get your system back to factory fresh specs. R.S. Andrews can do it for you. But you got to check them out online, rsandrews.com for more on that. Y'all have a great day. I will see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by Georgia United Credit Union. We'll talk to you then.